There is a building in Tribeca you could walk past 100 times and never think twice about. 9 stories, red brick the color of dried rust, a pale green door at the entrance, cast iron and heavy. The cobblestones in front of it are original. The building dates to 1921, built as a warehouse when this part of Lower Manhattan was still purely industrial. Goods moving in and out, nothing glamorous, nothing meant to last beyond its usefulness. And yet, in the early 1990s, the warehouses and factories that had defined it for a century were being hollowed out, their bones preserved, their interiors gutted and reimagined as living spaces for a new class of New Yorker who wanted what downtown had never really offered before: space. Raw, industrial, soaring space. The neighborhood wasn't yet synonymous with celebrity loft living. In 1994, it was still in transition. Still possible, if you knew where to look, to live like a downtown artist, even if you were not one. John F. Kennedy Jr. knew exactly where to look. By 1994, John was 33 years old and arguably the most recognizable face in America. He had grown up at 1045th Avenue in his mother Jackie's apartment. The entire 15th floor of an elegant 1930 Rosario Candela building on the Upper East Side overlooking Central Park. Paneled walls, French antiques, a baby grand piano. The weight of everything the Kennedy name carried, expressed in fabric and furniture, and the particular hush of rooms designed to hold history quietly. He chose instead a warehouse. In 1994, John purchased the top-floor loft at 20 North Moore Street for $700,000. He called it Home Depot. He called it the warehouse. Both nicknames were affectionate. The apartment was Unit 9, E, 9th floor, top of the building, 2,700 square feet of open-concept industrial space with barrel-vaulted ceilings that climbed to 14 feet. Skylights that threw light in at odd angles, and windows facing north, south, east, and west. The building had been a warehouse for heavy machinery before its conversion, and its bones made no attempt to disguise that history. Exposed brick, soaring interior columns, glass block walls, concrete counters. There was no doorman, a keyed elevator, in-unit washer and dryer, bike storage, 19 residences total, a pre-war co-op where apartments came up for sale perhaps twice a decade. Before John, the building had been home to David Letterman. The address had already been collecting its legends. Before 20 North Moore, John had lived uptown, closer to his mother's world than he perhaps intended. It was a building with a doorman. It had the things a Kennedy was supposed to have: discretion, address, proximity to the life he'd been born into. What it didn't have was distance. Downtown Manhattan in the early 1990s was a different city. Below Canal Street, below Chambers, Tribeca was still industrial in feeling, if not entirely in function. The streets were wide and quiet on weekends. There were no luxury hotels, no guided tours, no crowds arriving to photograph a famous face. A man could walk to the Hudson in the early morning and be nobody. He could carry a dog down cobblestones and be just a man with a dog. John understood at 33 that privacy was no longer something he could negotiate. It had to be built, not the way his mother had built it, behind the walls of 1045th Avenue and the armor of old money restraint. In a different way entirely, from the ground up, in a neighborhood no one was yet watching. He went downtown. The listing that eventually surfaced for Unit 9E describes it plainly: 7 rooms, 3 bedrooms, or more precisely, 2 bedrooms, and what was almost certainly John's home office for George magazine, where he served as founder and editor. 2 full bathrooms, a Miele cooktop, a Sub-Zero refrigerator, custom cabinetry. The ceilings described in the listing's own language: barrel-vaulted ceilings whose heights lift to 14 feet. The windows were enormous, huge tilt-and-turn European-style casements alongside classic industrial panes, giving onto unobstructed views in all 4 directions. On the top floor of a 9-story building in mid-1990s Tribeca, Before the neighborhood built up around it, that meant sky. The apartment also came with rooftop access, listed almost as an afterthought, but in practice, one of the most valuable things the apartment offered. In September 1995, a few months after Carolyn moved in, John launched George magazine. The premise was audacious, a glossy political publication with a celebrity sensibility, politics as popular culture. The newsstand next to Vogue, the debut cover was Cindy Crawford dressed as George Washington, white wig and powdered skin, baring her midriff. It sold out immediately. The home office at 9E was where a significant portion of George actually lived. John worked from the apartment regularly, and the line between the loft as home and the loft as creative workspace was never entirely clear. He was founder, editor-in-chief, public face, and chief salesman simultaneously. Rosemarie Terenzio, his executive assistant, was in and out of Northmore constantly. So were editors and contributors, the particular organized chaos of a startup magazine running on ambition and a name. If you could have stood in the apartment on a working afternoon in 1996, this is what you would have seen. Cover proofs pinned directly to the brick wall, the way a magazine office works when it has no real walls of its own. Stacks of back issues, a telephone that didn't stop. John at his desk near the windows, the Hudson visible in the distance behind him, talking to someone in Los Angeles about an advertising page, or to a contributor in Washington about a profile that needed tightening, or to no one, just reading. The 14-foot ceilings above all of it, light coming in from 4 directions. Carolyn had her own life in the same space, moving through the rooms he was also working in, navigating a loft that was simultaneously a home, a magazine, and the most photographed private address in New York. There was no separation because the architecture offered none. What the apartment had instead was enough space, just barely, for 2 people to exist within the same 2,700 square feet without colliding. The apartment absorbed all of it. Whether that was by design or simply by necessity, it held. Carolyn Bessette arrived at Northmore in the summer of 1995, a year before they married, and she brought with her something John's apartment didn't yet have, a point of view. John's sensibility, by all accounts, had been casual, warm but utilitarian. Prominent stereo speakers, low-slung sofas, surfaces without accessories. Comfortable, but not preoccupied with how things looked. Carolyn had spent her professional life at Calvin Klein, absorbing an aesthetic Klein himself had pioneered, the American version of minimalism, pared back, edited, nothing extraneous, every object earning its place. At Calvin Klein, negative space was not an absence, it was the point. The thing you removed mattered as much as the thing you kept. She brought that eye to Northmore, and it transformed the apartment. The stereo speakers were moved, the surfaces were edited. The clutter that accumulates in any space lived in by a person who doesn't think much about clutter began to disappear. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. At some point, in the mid to late 1990s, she went to Wyeth, one of the most respected design stores in New York, known for mid-century American furniture, and chose an Edward Wormley dining table and a set of 6 chairs, both from Dunbar Furniture. The table dated to 1954, lacquered mahogany and brass, long and low and spare. The chairs were from 1967, lacquered wood upholstered in Larson fabric. Jack Lenore Larson, the American textile designer whose work was as considered as the furniture it covered. Wormley was one of the great American furniture designers of the 20th century, less famous than Eames or Saarinen, but no less serious. He designed for Dunbar for nearly 3 decades, producing furniture that was warm where mid-century modernism sometimes ran cold, human where other designers of the era ran geometric. Carolyn didn't reach for the obvious names. She reached for the right ones. The table and the chairs were not decorative choices. They were an argument about what the apartment was. The industrial bones, exposed brick, Soaring columns, concrete counters, stayed exactly as they were. Against them, Carolyn placed furniture of such considered quietness that the combination became something neither element could have been alone. The warehouse and the wormly table, the raw and the precise, both fully themselves, neither apologizing for the other. In April 2018, nearly 2 decades after her death, both pieces went to auction. The table sold for $6,250. The chairs sold for $3,000. Each came with a letter of provenance from her sister, Lisa Bessette, confirming what the objects themselves already held. The apartment was open concept, living area, dining area, and kitchen flowing into one another across that single high-ceilinged plane. John displayed nothing that would announce who he was. No family photographs, no trophies, no plaques, no artifacts of the Kennedy name. He had grown up surrounded by history and chose, in his own home, silence. The one piece of art consistently mentioned by those who knew the space was a black and white photograph of African American convicts in the 1940s dancing in a prison courtyard. One photograph taken on John's birthday, November 30th, 1998, captures him standing in the living area. The space behind him is unexpectedly humble, unadorned, easy, lived in. Under a table to the right is Carolyn's black cat, Ruby. The dog Friday is in the frame too. A cat named Ruby and a dog named Friday. The most photographed address in New York, and inside it, those 2 animals and a woman who never gave a single interview. Before almost anything else in the morning, there was Friday. The dog was a Canaan dog, one of the oldest breeds in the world, and he needed walking, and John walked him. This was the most reliable constant in the public record of 20 Northmore. John on the cobblestones before the city woke up in whatever he had put on, Friday, pulling toward the Hudson. There are dozens of photographs. Paparazzi learned quickly that the dog created a schedule, and a schedule was a gift. Carolyn walked him too. She would come out of the green door in sunglasses, coat pulled close, and move down Northmore toward the water. The cameras were always there. She never looked up. Friday was just a dog who needed walking. He was also, without intending it, the reason the street outside was never entirely quiet. He needed the outside world, and the outside world was always waiting. The walks with Friday were only the beginning of the morning. After the dog, after the coffee, after the particular quiet of the loft, before the city fully started, John went further. 3 blocks west was the Hudson River. The esplanade along it was not yet the manicured park it would eventually become. In the mid-1990s, it was still transitional, a waterfront in the process of being reclaimed, and it was empty enough most mornings that a person could move along it without being followed. John ran there. He rollerbladed there, which became its own category of paparazzi photograph, the most famous man in New York on inline skates, making it look effortless in the way he made most things look effortless. He kayaked on the river when the season allowed. The bike stored in the building wasn't decorative. He rode through Tribeca in the early mornings when the loading docks were just coming to life, and the cobblestone streets were still wet from the night. No helmet, characteristically, no concession to the idea that the body required protection from the consequences of its own choices. This was why he had come downtown, not only for the space inside the apartment, but for the space outside it. The Upper East Side had no version of this. Uptown, he was always recognizable, always placed, always the son of a president moving through rooms that remembered it. Downtown in 1995, before Tribeca became what it became, he was simply a man on a bike at 6 a.m, and the city, for a few hours each day, allowed him to be nobody. Another photograph from the same birthday shows Carolyn in the kitchen, embracing John's longtime nanny and cook, Marta Scubin. White and brown cabinets, white walls, a collection of wine bottles along the counter. Carolyn had once called Martha Stewart for cooking advice. She and John also ordered KFC. A block away on Hudson Street was Bubby's, a Tribeca institution where John had been a customer since its first week. He ordered oatmeal and a cafe latte. They came back for the pancakes and the matzo ball soup. Everything a neighborhood restaurant offers to two people who had decided, in the middle of everything, to have a neighborhood. One note before the bedroom: the FX series Love Story, which aired in 2026, depicted 9E with a raised mezzanine and an elevated bedroom above the main floor. That never existed. The real apartment was a single-floor open plan. What it had instead was vertical air, 14 feet of it, the barrel-vaulted ceilings doing the work of height without requiring a staircase. There is one detail about the bedroom that almost no account of this apartment includes. No curtains, no shades, no coverings of any kind on the windows. This was, for years, the most surveilled private address in New York City. Paparazzi lived on that street. They camped outside the green door every morning, documenting every exit, every entrance, every walk with Friday down the cobblestones toward Hudson. No doorman, nothing between the street and the elevator, nothing between the elevator and the door of 9E. And yet in the bedroom, 9 floors up, above the reach of every camera pointed at that building, the windows were left bare. Just glass, and the Tribeca roofline, and the sky moving across 4 directions, and morning light pouring into a room the world could not see. A neighbor in the building, speaking anonymously years later, remembered what it had been like to live alongside them. They couldn't leave the building without being accosted. Before they married, we'd be able to sit on the deck together, and it was like a normal life. But after they got married, it got very chaotic. The building had a shared rooftop deck, and for a brief period it was exactly what it sounds like. Before the wedding, it was still possible to go up there. John and Caroline, the neighbors, the particular ease of people who happened to share a building and had made a quiet life in proximity. The deck had views in all directions, over the Tribeca roofline toward the Hudson, north toward Midtown's towers receding in the distance. On summer evenings, it would have been the most valuable room in the building. After September 1996, it became something else. The chaos wasn't only on the street below. It pressed upward. The ease of sitting outside together in the open air became something to be weighed and decided against. The rooftop that had once been the freest space in the building was eventually the one they were least able to use. The green door could be locked. The elevator required a key. The rooftop was open to the sky, and the sky by then was no longer safe. If they had expected the wedding to quiet things, they were wrong. The ceremony in September 1996 had been so secret that no journalist knew it was happening. Held at the First African Baptist Church on Cumberland Island, Georgia, with a guest list of barely 40 people. The marriage didn't satisfy the public appetite. It sharpened it. Caroline had gone from private citizen to global celebrity overnight, without warning and without consent. The paparazzi staked out the apartment, followed her through the neighborhood, photographed her fear. The single most invasive moment came before they were even married. On February 25, 1996, John and Caroline had brunch at the Tribeca Grill, a few blocks from North Moore. Afterward, they walked to a park with Friday. What happened next was captured by a paparazzo and a videographer who had been following them without their knowledge. The photographs showed a physical confrontation, her hand at the back of his neck, his hand at her jaw. John removed a ring from Caroline's finger, almost certainly her engagement ring, given they had been engaged since the previous July. The argument itself, according to Stephen Gillen and to Rosemarie Terenzio, was a recurring one. Caroline's frustration that John allowed people to use him, that he wouldn't draw lines other people would have drawn for themselves. None of that context traveled with the images. The National Enquirer ran 8 photographs under the headline, "Sunday in the Park with the George Editor." A bidding war for the video followed, reportedly reaching $100,000. CBS won it. The network's tabloid show Day and Date broadcast the footage over 5 consecutive days, beginning March 11th. The clip ran and ran. The fight that had no audio was given narration by everyone who watched it. She had not chosen any of it. Not the cameras, not the exposure, not the daily siege of Northmoor. That was not part of the story the footage told. The images followed her for the rest of her life. She never granted a single interview. She never provided the narrative the tabloids wanted to write for her. She moved through it all without comment, and they called her cold for it. She dressed her friends from her closet. She gave Rosemarie Terencio, John's executive assistant and one of Carolyn's closest friends, a faux fur leopard coat she'd bought at a Parisian flea market. Whenever Terencio had a date, Carolyn would say, "Come down, we'll pick something out for you." Her sister Lauren worked for Morgan Stanley and lived nearby in Tribeca. The same streets Carolyn moved through like a woman under surveillance were, for Lauren, just home. In the summer of 1999, Carolyn was excited about a computer. She had gotten an Apple iMac, the G3, which had launched the year before, in a range of translucent colors, like color returning to technology. Carolyn's was orange. Carol Radziwill remembered going over to Northmoor and seeing it for the first time. Carolyn was delighted. They could write emails now. Her email address was at Mindspring, not AOL, which, as Carol put it, every basic person had. She was still figuring out how to use it, still learning how to write an email, how to send one. Carol never received a message from that address. The plane went down on July 16, 1999, before a single email had been sent. That same summer, John and Carolyn were quietly making plans to leave. They had secured a property in New Canaan, Connecticut, where her sister Lisa still lived. The house had been under construction for several months. Land, a tennis court, a swimming pool. It would have been the first home they actually built together. Northmoor had been John's apartment first, his industrial loft, his low-slung sofas, his stereo speakers. Carolyn had brought her eye to it and made it theirs, but the bones of it had been his. New Canaan would have been different, designed for both of them, from the ground up, far from the green door, far from the cobblestones, far from the camera waiting every morning on the street below, the orange iMac, the house taking shape in Connecticut, an email address at Mindspring she was still learning to use. The summer of 1999 was full of things that never got to become anything. The flight had been planned for early evening, before dark. They had expected to be airborne by 6:30. Heavy traffic out of the city pushed the departure back, and by the time the plane lifted off from Essex County Airport in New Jersey, it was 8:38 in the evening, nearly half an hour past sunset. The moon was barely above the horizon and provided almost no light. Lauren was to be dropped at Martha's Vineyard first. John and Carolyn would continue to Hyannisport for the wedding of John's cousin Rory Kennedy the following day. John had broken his ankle in a hang-gliding accident 6 weeks before. The cast had been removed the day before the flight. He loaded the luggage on a cane. He never filed a flight plan. He never contacted air traffic control after takeoff. Over dark water, 7.5 miles short of Martha's Vineyard, spatial disorientation set in. The plane did not make it. After July 16th, the street in front of 20 Northmoor became a memorial. Flowers against the green door, letters, photographs, candles. The building that paparazzi had staked out for 3 years was now surrounded by people who came to grieve. In April 2000, 9 months after the crash, filmmaker Ed Burns purchased the loft. He lived there until around 2002, when he and his wife, Christy Turlington, combined it with another apartment on the same street. The space at 9E later appeared in Burns' 2011 film Newlyweds, shot inside the actual apartment, one of the few sustained visual records of what the interior looked like. The most recent comparable sale in the building, a 3-bedroom on the 7th floor, went for $4.35 million in 2021. John had paid $700,000 in 1994. Today, the building holds 19 residences and looks, from the street, exactly as it did 30 years ago. The same red brick, the same sage green door, the same cobblestones. John Kennedy grew up in one of the most formal apartments in New York. He chose instead a converted warehouse with no doorman, a kitchen stocked with KFC, barrel-vaulted ceilings 14 feet high, and a bedroom with no curtains. Carolyn Bessette grew up in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and built a life in New York on taste and precision. She chose a 1954 Edward Wormley dining table from a store most people hadn't heard of, an orange iMac, a black cat named Ruby, an email address at Mindspring she was still learning to use. The loft at Northmoor was the first home they shared, and the only one. Inside it, away from the street and the cameras and the green door, and everything that waited on the other side of it, they were just two people. A dog and a cat between them, bare windows open to the sky.
Thank you everyone so much for watching Cultured Elegance. If you'd love to support the channel, you can become a channel member today by clicking Join at the bottom of the screen. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.